Large intake of breath, everyone. We're going to get through this together. That was quite the day at Carrow Road. Toxicity aplenty, a heavy defeat, certainly no talk of playoffs, dead and buried. Norwich City are done. Their season has crashed and burnt out. It's less of a fizzle. I mean, if you're going to go out with the tyres exploding and setting the place on fire. Dear me. This is the latest edition of the PinkUn.com Norwich City podcast. I'm your host, Connor Southwell, and we're joined by Paddy, Davitt and Samuel Seaman to pick at the carcass of the 3-0 defeat to Swansea. Gents, Pad, I mean, where do you even start with that? It was just a dismal, woeful day, and I actually think a lot of Norwich fans will have come away from that game feeling incredibly embarrassed about their football club and the way they performed, but also the direction of travel at this moment in time.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll get into it in more depth, but there was empty seats from people who left and were not returning at the start of the second half. There was another tranche when I think Swansea scored their third goal, and by the end, even more. And there's a guy who we know very well, I won't name him, but a long-standing season ticket holder sits in front of us in the City stand. I looked at the clock, it was about 80 minutes to go, and he turned to us and said he was off and he'd read the match report on Monday, and I told him probably best not to bother because this is not a game you want to relive, really. I haven't checked, but I think the Newcastle game last season in the Premier League, towards the end of what was an inevitable relegation, that, if I'm not mistaken, that was April as well. It was certainly towards the back end of the season, and that's the only thing I can compare this with in terms of, for anybody who's erased that from the memory. That was a 3-0 defeat. Newcastle were, in second, third gear that day, dismissed Norwich, and then there was those protests after the game directed at Stuart Webber, small group. I think he subsequently called them sort of 5 or 10 fans with a bed sheet, but and that viral video of Stuart Webber in the doorway of the director's entrance with Zoe Webber, wife and executive director, pulling him back inside when he'd gone to reason with them, confront them, delete as applicable. But this feels like there again, and that resulted in no material change in terms of the people at the top of the tree. But whether that's the case, remains the case moving forward, time will tell from here. But it certainly felt we were back there again in terms of this kind of chasm between, and you can debate, depending where you are on the spectrum, that it was a few fans or it was, one or two disaffected pockets within the ground, or whether it was more than that.
It was more than that.
It was more than that. It felt more than that. So, but that's by the by, where you want to set the measure of how many Norwich fans are done and dusted with it and have had enough. What isn't in dispute, even if you're inside that football club, is huge swathes of your fan base, whether they're protesting with their voices or whether they're staying away, they're not happy. They're not happy at the direction of their club. And it's dangerous territory now, because when the anger subsides, then it becomes disenchantment, then it becomes disinterest, and then not caring, and that is not a situation that you really want to be in if you're shaping the direction of this football club. And let's broaden it out. It isn't about this season now, that's gone, but it's about the summer, next season, and then seasons to come. And we know there's this potential shift in the power base in terms of Mark Atanasio and his group, and taking more shares on board and having a more active say in terms of potentially the ownership tilting a little bit. But that's all for the future still. In the here and now, it's those who have got their hands on the tiller of this club, in the eyes of many Norwich fans, have had enough and they want change. And it's going to be really intriguing what happens from here. We'll get into it in more depth, but we put those points to David Wagner, and he was very robust in his defence of Stuart Webber after the game. But it feels like another maybe watershed afternoon, I think, in terms of Stuart Webber and his relationship with Norwich's fan base and the club more broadly. And what we saw unfold today is, it's not good enough for a club with Norwich's recent past in terms of where they've competed, the levels they've competed at, the success they've had, and we all have to make it quite clear that's shaped by Stuart Webber in his period of time, but that's gone. That's in the past. It's about the here and now, and it's about the future. And they're a long way from hitting those sort of metrics that they hit under Stuart Webber before. So the question is, where do we go from here? And is Stuart Webber still the person who takes us forward. And if he is, how he repairs what seems to be a huge fracture now with, as I say, for me, it feels like large sections of that fan base. Because if you drill down to what the core of Webber's success originally was, with Daniel Farker alongside him in that fertile period, it was that the club was together, on and pitch, off the pitch, in the stands, in the playing squad, in the back offices of that football club. Everybody was rowing in behind this bold, bright new vision. Norwich were ahead of the curve. They were doing things differently. It was fresh. It was energetic. It was exciting. What we got now, it's gone from intoxicating to toxic, and you know, it's hard to see a way forward with the status quo as it stands. But you know, they may have a different view once the dust settles. But it's indisputable now. You look at it, and the results this season tell you that things are badly wrong, and there's a rottenness inside that football club, and it needs to be addressed. It needs to be acknowledged, firstly, publicly, then it needs to be addressed, and then hopefully everybody can move forward and you start to bring people back together, because there's no way that's happening in terms of the current dynamic.
Yeah, bang on, and we will, of course, speak more about those chants and where Norwich City are at off the pitch, but we have to address where they are on the pitch, Sam, which is 1 win in 9. They've not scored a goal in 4 home games. 4 home games without a goal. It's incredible. I mean, me and Paddy were looking at the form table on the way to QPR, and it was just Wigan, Reading and Blackpool below them in that form table.
21st, I think.
Yeah, 21st in that form table over basically since Millwall. I mean, we said it last time we did one of these. The drop off since that day in that game beyond the Blackburn game, just incredible. But what we saw today from level of performance, because a lot of this podcast is going to be about Stuart Webber, is going to be about the direction of travel. So let's speak about what happened on the pitch today, because I would say it was, I've used the same word, embarrassing, particularly that second half when you've got 10 people in yellow and green shirts, submissive, behind the ball, not engaging, no energy, no tempo. They concede a goal, they stand there, kind of flail their arms about and kind of looking to blame each other. It was a really, really horrendous day on the pitch for Norwich City as well.
Yeah, and I thought Swansea actually highlighted everything that was wrong with them, really. It was the style of play Norwich fans had been used to at one point, actually, and the way that they moved the ball around, to me, was immaculate and was actually fantastic. And it was very, very good football that Russell Martin's got them playing. And you would watch, 2 or 3 good minutes of Swansea knowing where the next pass was going to be and how they were going to find that free man. And then they would see possession, and in 10 seconds, one of Norwich's centre-backs had found a way to chip the ball forward to no real target. And it just felt to me like a situation that highlighted exactly what's gone wrong for Norwich all season, and the difference between what Norwich fans expected 3-4 years ago and what they expect now, because Russell Martin's team was probably playing the sort of style Norwich fans were proud to associate themselves with back in those early days of Stuart Webber's tenure and those times under Daniel Farker. And yeah, to watch a team that firstly didn't know what it was and secondly was performing really poorly. You can move tactics to the side a little bit, and obviously at this level it's a really important thing, but you can separate that and actual quality, because maybe you are having to play long balls because you're not quite sure what you're doing, but these are players who are supposed to be supremely talented. They're very well paid. They're in a very privileged position to be better at that, and when you can't even really find one of your players with one of your maybe misguided balls forward, I think that's a problem. So yeah, on the pitch for me it was almost a twofold thing. There have been a number of occasions where we've been looking at games as Norwich failing to beat teams that they should be beating. But I thought perhaps what made it even sadder for Norwich today was that they were playing a team who just outclassed them and looked so much like the better team. It actually was quite reminiscent of last season in terms of how much control those players had and how much better they looked. And this is a team that ends the day, after beating Norwich 3-0, ends the day below them in the Championship table. And I think that tells you everything you need to know about quite how badly this game has gone compared to how maybe it could have gone when you look at the quality of the teams. So Yeah, not a great day for Norwich fans at all, perhaps even the worst in a very long time. And I did feel on the pitch it highlighted quite how big the gap is. But in the long term, I think that might be a good thing because, yes, we've already heard signs of Stuart Webber talking about a rebuild of sorts. He hasn't used that word, but Hernandez's contract announcement, he did say that there would be a lot of changes this summer. So he's clearly aware that was something that needed to happen. But perhaps if he was in any doubt as to quite the extent to which that needed to be done, he certainly won't be after today because this is a team who at the start of the season they thought they could be finishing quite a lot higher in the league than, and they've been absolutely outclassed. So yeah, all the problems on the pitch exposed today for me.
Yes. Norwich City's last 3 results: 5-1 defeat away at Middlesbrough last Friday, 1-1 draw with a QPR side who couldn't buy a win for love nor money before they played Norwich City, although they have beaten Burnley today, although I think Burnley are still hanging off the promotion bus, aren't they, in celebration a little bit, as Norwich City were 2 years ago. So I think you can get freak results when that kind of happens, but it was 1 win in 19 and yet they managed to get a point off Norwich. And then today, Swansea, who did come into this game off the back of 5 wins from 6, but to lose 3-0, to capitulate in the way that they did, not just in terms of the goals, but Sam McCallum getting a red card. Just woeful. And we will come back to David Wagner because I think there has been some conversation about how much of the blame he should take. So we will have that conversation later on. I don't want just to park the on-pitch stuff here, but we could meticulously dissect it. But I think we will keep coming back to the line that just not good enough in any areas. And it was one team with a plan playing one team that didn't have a plan. And maybe it was one football club that has a plan and one football club that doesn't have a plan. I tweeted this at the full-time whistle, Paddy, but if Norwich City extract maximum points from their last 2 games, which you would say, given one of them is against West Brom, looks highly unlikely. And to be frank, the way they're playing at the moment looks pretty unlikely anyway, irrespective of opponent. They would get a maximum of 68 points. In 2017, when they decided to hit the reset button, when they decided to completely restructure the club, Stuart Webber was hired. There was obviously a lot of criticism from him about what had gone on before. They finished 8th. They got 70 points. This group of players are going to finish with at least 2 points fewer, potentially probably even more. The fans, as you said in your opening gambit there, have made their feelings heard. What happens from here now? What can happen? Because if that was deemed to be a failure worth completely remodelling and restructuring the shape of the club, back in 2017, I don't know how many years ago that was, 5-6 years ago, where does it leave the football club tonight, knowing that they're going to be worse off than that total?
Well, I mean, this will be the dissection of, if you want to package it, Webber's era. Are they now further back from the point that he inherited, or if you put those other chips on the table, i.e. the transformational work at Colney and the infrastructure that's gone on there, and stack all these other positive elements of what he's done, and they're not in dispute, then there'll be others who say, well, no, you can't draw that parallel. But if you're purely talking in terms of on the pitch and the group of players that are out there representing Norwich City, then a very straight, clear parallel between 2 championship seasons, and that they're inferior this time around, then it's not a good look, is it? And ultimately, you're asking what happens from here now, what needs to happen if it's going to be Stuart Webber driving this forward. And we recorded a podcast last weekend when we got back from Middlesbrough, and certainly me and you, Connor, were of the opinion that if he still had the drive, the energy, the hunger to want to do this, I don't think there's a better option out there for me, because he's proven he can do it. He can do it before, and the point that you're talking about was where he came in, and what he built from that point onwards was nothing short of miraculous, given the financial problems that he inherited, and the squad that were tired and jaded and well past their sell-by, and players in the stand earning big money not playing.
There's a lot of parallels now.
There is, and those phrases I've thrown out there are recollections of how Stuart Webber looked at that group of players that he inherited, And there'll be those.
He went harder than that as well. He spoke about, I won't use the exact term he used, but he spoke about throwing money up the wall essentially on players. I think the same charges will be levelled at him from a lot of Norwich City fans.
And my point is now that to answer those charges, and if you are the person who still wants to be here and still wants to put this right and stand square alongside David Wagner in getting this club back to the Premier League and keeping them there, which is what he stated when he unveiled David officially back in January, then we need to hear from him. We need to hear from him, and he needs to be externally scrutinised as well, not a club-controlled interview, to put it that way, as they did at the end of last season, where they choose the questions, presumably, and they edit what goes in and what doesn't go in. That isn't going to cut it, I don't think. And that's not saying that it's us who need to have that sit-down. I'm just talking about he needs to front up and he needs to answer some tough questions. And then the answers, I guess, will dictate, and the mood that he exhibits and how he delivers that will I think, frame a lot of what next, really. You know, if he is up for it, then let's hear it. Let's hear what on earth he's going to do that's going to be different to what we're experiencing at the minute and breaking this cycle. How he can do that in terms of the financial constraints he's under. All of these questions which he would be put to and then come back and answer. You know, if it's an internal club-controlled interview, who knows? So, but I think what's beyond doubt is, given how poorly that was received at the end of last season, if they were to repeat that, then that's one for the club to decide, isn't it, ultimately? But I think that they'd probably be on a loser, and that's only been amplified by what's happened here today at Carrow Road, that there's a fan base demanding answers, and he is the figurehead for this football club. He's not the owner, clearly, but he is the footballing figurehead. He runs it day to day, in tandem with the executive committee, and they've failed. They've failed beyond doubt. However you want to cut it, this season is an abject failure, and they've been driving this. So, you know, for me, what next is that it's some accountability, some public accountability, some external public scrutiny, and then people can make their own decisions. Then, you know, if it's I'm here, I'm in it for the long haul, I've got it wrong, and I'm going to do everything I can in my power to put it right, with all the people around him, of course, as well, because it's not simply about Stuart Webber. This, for me, this is the club as a whole. You know, every facet of the operations there, people who are working in whatever departments, they need to look at themselves and look at what they've done this season, and have they hit their individual metrics? Because if you stitch it all together, as I say, on the pitch, which is where it matters most, it's a failure. And you know, without that, really, for me, that public accountability, then I find it very difficult to think that they can bring enough fans with them to row in behind and say, OK, let's go again, and you're the person to drive this forward. Because if they don't get any sense that there's an acceptance of the failure and the failings and a culpability and an ownership then of the failings, then how can you have any real trust in the process and the individuals driving it forward? So for me, you know, there'll be people inside the football club won't want to hear any of that, I'm sure, but I think respectfully and politely, if they were to just sit down with any group of Norwich fans, any demographic, they would pretty much get the same messaging, and if they choose to ignore that, then that's on them.
Yeah, well, I think what the fans felt was documented loud and clear today, and it's about time they stopped being spoken to and started being spoken with, I think, a little bit more, given what we've seen. And actually, of all the stuff that you mentioned there, I would throw in a bit humility as well, actually, given what we've seen in the past 12 months or so. Sam, I wasn't at the 7-1 Colchester game. I started as a season ticket holder in the second half of that League One campaign. And, you know, you could create an argument, I guess, and take a bigger picture view that actually today was a game that exposed all of Norwich City's flaws, possibly as a football club, but certainly on the pitch and the shortcomings in those areas. And I'm sure, as Paddy referenced, I'm sure it has opened a few eyes. And if it hasn't, then goodness knows what will. Just for you, being in Carrow Road, that level of toxicity, it was slightly different, obviously, against Blackburn earlier on in the season, because that was directed very much at one man, and that was Dean Smith, who, ironically, could keep Leicester up in the Premier League this season, which is just utterly baffling, really, considering where we were in December. But is that as toxic, as angry as you felt Carrow Road in your time, both supporting and now covering the club?
Yeah, I think so. as you say, there was that Blackburn one, but there was probably more of a sense of purpose and of the fans having something to direct that at. I mean, you sort of touched on it, but there was at least an outlet to say, this is what we want, and demand that of somebody who could actually make that decision. And, for various different reasons, and whatever they are, it feels quite a lot less likely that Norwich fans demand Stuart Webber goes, as they did today, and there's really anybody who they can demand that to, and that's actually going to happen. So today I felt there was a different type of toxicity, perhaps a more organic one, about just actually them being quite fed up and feeling fed up at Carrow Road, and that being reflected in their chants and their mood and what they were saying, and actually also the number of people leaving really, really early. A lot of them left sort of 35 minutes into the game and around that second goal and the red card. So for me, it was different to probably that Blackburn one, which probably was as toxic as I've seen it. I wasn't really, to be honest, going regularly to games in sort of David McNally, Chris Hughton time, when I imagine it probably also was quite tense and quite difficult to be at Carrow Road. But for me, it's probably the most frustrated these fans have ever felt, because I think all football fans have the ability to demand that a manager goes, and we've all been in positions at various football clubs that we've supported where you've wanted a manager to go, and unfortunately that does happen. But with this quite weird situation where quite a lot of people want Stuart Webber to go, quite a lot of people I heard today were suggesting that Delia Smith should be selling her stake in the football club. That's not really a thing that football fans can demand so much, and it's the reason why clubs like Manchester United have fans who are so unhappy, because really you can't actually force an owner to sell. You can't really force that over the line like fans do with on a footballing level.
But I guess the point to make about that is Manchester United fans, who you've referenced there, have been speaking about their ownership for probably about 20, well, certainly since they took over, close to 20 years. And I guess that pressure has built to a point where it's happened. Similarly, like you say, with managers where it's slightly easier, but it does feel when the fans turn in that way and the pressure is cranked up, even not if immediately, they do eventually kind of get their wish. And we saw that again with Dean Smith earlier on this season.
Yeah, but I think it still comes down to what Stuart Webber realistically wants to do, because I think he probably knew around the time of Dean Smith's sacking, and he sort of admitted it in an interview after, that he would have liked to hang on to Dean Smith for a bit longer. But I think he realised if he was the sporting director of this football club and he was responsible for the fans being happy with what things looked like on the pitch, that was something he had to do, whether he liked it or not. Now he's in a position where he's controlling his own destiny, really, and there's not somebody to take over, I don't think, personally, and say, okay, now's enough time. And there's nobody, I think, that's going to jump in and say, if I'm going to do my job properly, Stuart Webber has to go. And I'm not calling for him to go necessarily. I'm just saying this is why it's quite a lot more complex and quite a lot more frustrating, I think, for the fans that I speak to. And there are a few things with the club at the moment as well. It's not just Stuart Webber, it's also the finances. How many times this season have we said they need a massive rebuild in the summer, but actually how are you going to do that, because there's not enough money? I think there are a lot of aspects around the football club now that it almost feels like Norwich are trapped in until they manage to get some sort of lucky promotion, and that's probably a situation a lot of the also-rans in the Championship find themselves in. So there's probably a lot of worry in that fan base that things aren't going to get out of this rut anytime soon. And I felt today was a real opportunity to see them voting with their feet. I, for example, know a number of people who have said to me, I wasn't there today, I gave up my season ticket, or I've seen people tweeting, I don't want to go, anybody want to take my ticket, etc. And I think it was a real example of the fact that actually people aren't that bothered about coming to Carrow Road anymore. It's not where before it was the highlight of people's weeks. Now they're in a position where in some ways it makes their Saturday worse, and it's not even worth the inconvenience to head down to Carrow Road and watch a game of football, even after they've already paid for it. And that's such a different position to where they found themselves in recent times, because as much as the fan base have been criticised, even by the likes of Stuart Webber in recent times, this is a fan base that consistently has turned up week in, week out, and it probably shows you where they are now. The fact that they were turning up in League One and probably haven't been turning up as much in a championship season where they're in the top half. And that tells you what direction they think the football club's going in. So I totally understand the frustration, and I can see that it's actually a really, really difficult position to be in. So I totally understand the toxicity today, but yeah, it really wasn't a fun place to be in Carrow Road, I don't think. And the only real thing you wanted to be there, almost out of morbid curiosity, was to find out how much worse it was going to get. And, you know, that really is the worst position for a football club to be in. So as Paddy spoke about with coming out and having some accountability, you do need to bring those fans along with you. They did that so well at the start of Webber's reign, and if it's going to have a second revival and he's going to come back into his own, those fans do really need to be brought back into the fold, and I don't think I can stress enough how important that is.
Yeah, and I think the word both of you have used already is accountability, and that's I feel going to be the big word coming out of tonight as well, because if you distill it down and you look at Daniel Farke, well, he was held accountable for what was a pretty poor start to the Premier League campaign. He lost his job. Dean Smith, well, he was held accountable for the first half of this championship campaign. I think there will be a lot of people, Paddy, who look at Stuart Webber tonight. Look, the chants weren't just about Stuart Webber. There were wider chants about Sack the Board as well, and we all come back onto them. But obviously, you have to focus on Stuart Webber. But
who's going to sack the board?
Well, who's going to sack Stuart Webber? But we'll come back onto that in a minute. But this is the point, isn't it? You've had two head coaches who have been held accountable. So I guess again, I'll use the word charge. The charge that's going to be put at Stuart Webber is, how can you constantly blame the person or the people below you for what is clearly a cultural issue now? I think we can say at this club this season. Yeah. If the buck stops with a sporting director, that is where the blame is going to be pushed, and where the fingers are going to be pointed at.
Absolutely, yeah, and he will know that better than any. And he owned, if you remember, because I remember going down to Colney at the end of the Premier League season the first time round, which was a very uncompetitive attempt, but we all know the factors for that and the financial factors that were in play, and in terms of the ability or the capacity they had to improve that squad that first time round, it was negligible, and that was shown to be the case. But he owned it, because the focus, I recall, was kind of directed towards Daniel and Daniel Farke's failings for not overseeing a more competitive attempt at Premier League survival. And he said, to that effect, he said the book stopped with him. Don't blame Daniel. We didn't equip him with the resources to have a real attempt. But second time around, we all know that, and it's at the root of probably a lot of the concerns around the finances now, that they did have a go relative to Norwich. They had a real go. You've seen subsequently various football finance experts in the football field map out quite clearly in terms of the wages they were paying, in terms of the money they spent. Far better than 20th again in the Premier League with was it less points second time around?
No, one more.
One more. Yeah. So.
But this is it, isn't it?
This is the problem.
You talk about
and that was on his watch, and he oversaw that. So, it goes back to what I said previously, that in contrast to the end of the first Premier League season, when he was A, open to external scrutiny, and B, was willing to admit he got things wrong, and that it wasn't a failing of Daniel Farke or the players necessarily, but as a club they got things wrong, and he's the person at the apex of that in terms of the day-to-day control of the club. So of course he has to take ultimate responsibility, and I think that approach underpinned what happened thereafter. The Championship return and then another tilt in the Premier League, because even though it was a disappointment that first time round in the Premier League, I think for a fan to hear we got things wrong, but we've learned, we'll put things right, and we'll be better next time around. That clearly wasn't the case second time around. And at the end of the second Premier League season, there was no public accountability. There was no external scrutiny, and that's where probably a lot of what's erupted today festers, is that if he's not held accountable and he's not accessible to be scrutinised, then how do you have any real faith that or even getting insight into what he's thinking and how he views it and where it's gone wrong and how he's going to put it right. If you don't get answers to those questions, then if you're a fan going there today, if you've renewed your season ticket again, then you have to be genuinely concerned, because you're not hearing what you need to hear to feel that, okay, yeah, it's failed again, and we know why it's failed, and we have faith that these people can put it right again. And that until or if that happens, then they're really storing up a lot of this, and this will rupture again if we don't get that, and it returns to the start of next season and things start poorly again next season. We'll be back here again, no doubt about it. So, there's some very astute individuals in key roles in that football club. They should be reading the room, is my advice, and acting accordingly in these weeks ahead, because how they act now will frame probably what happens in the next few seasons, not just this summer and beyond. It could really set this course for where we go, with obviously the overhanging situation in terms of allotment of shares and maybe a shift in terms of the shareholder mix and what that means moving forward in terms of ownership. That's obviously clearly in the background, and I think we'll get some clarity on that before now and the end of the season. That might actually be a good starting point to then move it forward, because it will feel as if there is a dial turning, and that there is some tangible reaction or a different approach maybe starting to happen at boardroom level. But that also needs to be replicated in terms of Stuart Webber and the people around him on that executive committee. It isn't enough for us to end this season, and we don't get those touch points, and we don't get that accountability, and think that everything's going to be okay, and that they'll have a refresh over the summer, and they make a few changes to the squad, and on we go again. Because I'm afraid if this season teaches them anything, it's they need to learn the lessons of what they didn't do last summer at the end of that Premier League relegation. Yeah,
and at least they need to learn. Look, they pay PR companies for advice on this, which maybe is slightly ironic, but given let's talk about them as decisions, because it's a decision not to communicate, and it's a decision, the strategy that they've taken.
Well, they would say they communicate, Connor. It's just where the channels they choose to
for a programme column. Come on.
Well, I'm not for 1 minute defending a programme column. I'm just saying that they're the channel.
If you're a fan, is that a way that you would feel like you're being communicated with? Well, let's be honest, the circulation on those are not great.
Well, it's a very all I'll say is diplomatically, it's a very one-way.
That's what I meant in terms
method
of
communication.
They're speaking to fans, they're not speaking with fans.
Absolutely.
And the reason that's relevant is because that wasn't the case when things were good. Yeah. And this is what I mean in terms of the strategy, the road that they've decided to head down.
They've become very insular, really. That's ultimately what it boils down to. They've become very insular in their approach. Well, clearly it's not working. No, which is why somebody needs to stick their head above the parapet and realise that and read the situation. I can't quite fathom that they continue to go down this path that clearly isn't working. And, if they don't change tack, then I'd see nothing but it's going to get worse from here. So, at some point, you have to stop digging, don't you? And you have to put your head up, look around, and think, how do we get out of this situation? Because at the minute, they're just digging a bigger hole for themselves, is how I read it.
Yeah, and Sam, I guess that sort of lends us nicely onto David Wagner and some of his comments post-game. I mean, it was quite interesting, actually. He was, as Paddy said earlier, very staunch in his defence of Stuart Webber, who clearly they've worked together at Huddersfield. They're working together now. We could all make all kind of statements about that. Now, I really like David Wagner as a human being. I think the way that he's tried to communicate since he's come through the door as Norwich City's head coach has been, by and large, pretty good. I think he's been pretty honest by all accounts. Maybe it was just a clumsy way of framing it, and maybe it kind of got lost in translation, but and various reasons for it. But the line in terms of nobody cares more about this football club than Stuart Webber, and I think we all kind of know what he means. But at the point where Carrow Road was full again, fans have paid money, and some of them and travelled up to watch their team get beat 5-1 at Middlesbrough or put in a pretty abject performance at QPR, just didn't necessarily feel like the right words to say. But coming on to him more broadly, I mean, where is he in terms of the criticism? Because he didn't get any of it, I would say, at Carrow Road today, really. There were no audible chance directed at him. I mean, Dean Smith was in quite a similar position last season. I mean, where are you at with David Wagner? Because I kind of made the arguments. We did a preview video on YouTube before it. I think you can kind of say, yep, he's had injuries. He's been dealt a really hard and difficult hand, and it's a tough job. And I think we said that when he was appointed. But I think it's also fair to say, well, they've won 1 in 9. It's a group of players that he should probably be getting more out of, but then Dean Smith didn't. So where are you at with David Wagner at the moment?
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm especially happy with David Wagner at the moment. I think as much as I'm not saying it's time to decide, he's not the man to lead the club, and Webber was probably right when he arrived to say he's not going to be judged on whether he qualifies for the playoffs or not. There are certainly a number of ways and a number of games you could point to this season that Norwich probably would have done better under a different manager or with a different tactical setup. And I do think David Wagner has got a few things wrong as Norwich head coach, and it's always a bit of a thing not having your own players and not really having windows to bring in players who fit your style. He's obviously only brought in Marquinhos as an actual signing, and that was on loan, probably from a quite limited market and late in the window. But yeah, I think there are a number of ways and a number of games you could look at and say, actually, I didn't really know what he was trying to do, especially against the big teams. I think
they just run a lot, don't they?
Yeah, well, this is the thing. He came in and talked a lot about philosophy and stuff, and I think because he comes from a similar school to Farker and probably had a recognisable philosophy at Huddersfield, at the start there was an assumption that everything he did was a very intentional thing. And if you've only seen 2 games and the same things happen in both of those games, it's quite easy to say, okay, that's the David Wagner philosophy. But looking back now, are there many things that this team has in common with the one that beat Preston and Coventry in his first 2 league games in charge? I'm not sure there really are. So I'm not sure I could actually highlight what David Wagner's brought into Norwich City, what I can now go to Carrow Road and say I'm definitely going to see from this Norwich team. So in terms of philosophy, which was for me a massive point in his appointment and probably a huge error in Dean Smith's tenure, was that he lacked that philosophy and he lacked that ability to clearly put a team out that you know is going to play a certain way. When you bring in Wagner on that point and say he's a manager who we think can fill that void, and he doesn't, I think it doesn't look great for a first few months. So with the wholesale changes that seem to have been, if not promised, at least suggested by the club, then perhaps next season we'll start to see the signs of what David Wagner is. But right now, I'm not sure I really see too many good spells in possession from Norwich. The long balls don't look like they're particularly well planned or a tactical strategy. They look like what the centre-backs do when they run out of ideas or when they're under pressure near the touchline. And just the results haven't been good enough. They've played teams where Wagner has had better players than his counterpart, and his counterpart has been able to find a way to beat this Norwich team. So as much as I don't think it's necessarily an indicator of where Norwich are going in the future, it's very hard to look at this run of games and say Wagner's even done better than Dean Smith, to be honest, because Dean Smith, I think, yeah, he left them 5th, but after I think the results come in, they were 11th. Now they're 10th, aren't they? So they're 10th, 3 months into Wagner's tenure, and the football isn't really any more attractive. There aren't too many players who look like they've actually improved long term. I know the fullbacks at the start of his tenure, and probably Kieran Dowell and Ono Hernandez, to be fair, are players that at the start of his tenure we were pointing out had improved. But I'm not sure Aarons is really the same player currently that he was in those early Wagner games. Your new list for me has been on the decline in recent games. Sam McCallum is a player who plays in that position as well, and really obviously struggled today with the red card, and I think he was out of position for actually all of the key incidents that he was on the pitch for in the game. What are you really looking at and saying that's what David Wagner's done so far? I like the fact that he's a good communicator, And I don't want it to sound like, in hindsight, we're talking about the whole of Dean Smith's reign. We're talking about he needs to be a better communicator. They get in a better communicator, and I say communication's fine, but you need to be doing this. But it is true that football fans care most about what happens on the pitch, and not really much has changed for me on the pitch. And it feels like Wagner's got a lot of good grace, but rightfully that's probably wearing off at this stage. And he does need to deliver next season for me. And it might be quite a difficult one, because if you don't have that messaging coming out from Webber, and it could be that he does come out and he does all the things that we've said he needs to do and he takes some accountability, but right now it feels like Wagner needs to be backed by a sporting director who says, okay, you might need to give us 2 years, or it's not David's fault if we don't get promoted next year, because this is the plan, and this is how we're going to achieve it. Whereas right now he's sort of left to fend for himself based on the goals that were set all the way back at the start of the season, when under Dean Smith's leadership it was suggested that Norwich really should be promoted with this squad of players. So judging him on that, he's not got close, and judging him on more common sense and improvement and how different this team looks to what they did when he arrived, I think it also doesn't look especially good. So I'm certainly willing to give him time and to say that he's got a decent track record at this level and speaks like somebody who can go and achieve something with this football club. But we really do need to start seeing some evidence soon, because I can understand the fans who are now actually starting to question him, because the signs haven't been good in recent weeks, and I would like to see at least a few performances at the start of next season that I can say, okay, this is what Wagner's changed, this is what Norwich are going to look like from now on, and this is how it's going to improve them.
Yeah, I mean, my fear of him is, and I think we said this when he was appointed, his teams throughout his career really have been quite streaky, and that has also, that there's a plus point to that. It's not a negative point at all, because Huddersfield were quite streaky in the Premier League in the first year and managed to stay up. So as did his Dortmund side after he got them promoted, he managed to keep them up as well in a higher division. Obviously Dortmund too, so different levels. But that streakiness has worked in his favour. He had a very, very good run in charge of Schalke, but obviously you get the flip side of that and you get these slumps. And my fear long term is similarly to Dean Smith, Norwich get kind of trapped again, where it's kind of, it gets pulled into a new season, the performances maybe don't improve in the way that people expect, and then you kind of are doing the same thing, you're kind of stuck in a little bit of a cycle. So, and then this is where communication's key, right? Because if it is David Wagner, and I think we probably all agree that it should be, and I think most fans agree that it should be as well, there needs to be communicated that is the case and that is the plan, and that was maybe the issue with Dean Smith, who's kind of left, where I think we all had sympathy with Dean Smith, who's kind of left to fend for himself during a lot of his Norwich tenure, and kind of being asked to explain stuff that really wasn't in his remit to do in terms of plans and philosophies and stuff like this, when actually when you look at the direction the club did veer in to try and be more pragmatic, he was actually identified to do that. So just hope that David Wagner doesn't find himself in a similar boat. Last point on this, Pad, because I feel like we could talk for 2 hours about the general direction of the club, and that's maybe the slightly uncomfortable conversation, really, because Norwich fans are having it, so we have to speak about it. In that, when you talk about Stuart Webber, you have to speak about Zoe Webber, right? And the fact that on the board of directors is his wife, which isn't a way that any of us wants to look at it, and obviously in a senior role is her husband, so you can flip that debate as well. But maybe it feeds back to the point of accountability, but I guess there's a feeling around that, isn't there? And maybe it comes back to the accountability point that we were speaking about. Some fans do have an uncomfortableness with that, the fact that there is kind of two married couples, I guess, at the top of Norwich City Football Club running it, and many fans, I'm not necessarily saying it's my opinion, I'm just asking the question, and you'll obviously provide the answer, but there is, as I say, an uncomfortableness around the relationships that exist at the top end of the club, even if I think that's unfair given the credentials of the people involved.
Well, I mean, by way of countering that, all those individuals you referenced were there, both the promotions. I'm just asking
the question, it's not an opinion.
No, but I'm just stating the facts of the matter, that they were also the quite key movers and shakers that plotted two championship title wins and two attempts, poor ones as it turned out, at the Premier League. So this is the inherent contradiction in this kind of ongoing. Well, it needs to change now. okay, it changes. Who comes in? Who comes in? Who can guarantee that this can move forward in a? And that isn't a charter for keeping the status quo. What that is again this acknowledgement that we know things are not right. We know things have gone wrong. That's on our watch. We own that, and we will endeavour to put it right. And we have a plan to put it right, and maybe enlighten the fan base what that plan is. What does it look like? I think there was no doubt when Stuart Webber got first in the building, how they were going to go about things. It was visible, the transformation at Colney, the transformation in terms of appointing an overseas philosophically based coach in Daniel Farker. That was new, fresh, exciting. Then the evolution of the squad and the style of play, and that was going to be replicated in the academy sides as well. All of that was clear and was obvious, and results were tangible on the pitch, off the pitch. We need to see something again. It's almost like they need to go back to maybe not the drawing board, but certainly update the blueprint and show that they've amassed all the experiences, good and bad, over these 6 years, and they've still got, as I say, the energy, the drive, and the hunger to want to go again and fight against the adversity of maybe not having the finances that they certainly had in the Premier League, to try and produce what they did first time round, which was an against the odds promotion to the Premier League. And then if they can get back to the Premier League, then that's the acid test. Really, is can they learn from the last two attempts and at least have a realistic stab at sustainability? But that's for the birds. Talking about Premier League and the current status is for a long time into the future. Right now, it's sifting through the wreckage of where we are now and putting it right. And I personally don't have maybe those concerns about any fans who look at the dynamic in play and is that an inherently a healthy culture, because we've seen that it can bring success. So for me, it's less about the individuals. It's more about, as I say, accepting that it hasn't gone right, owning that, and let's see what they want, or at least how they envisage putting it right. And then if they start to back that up with actions, then I think you'll find the disaffected potentially will be willing to row back in again. But that feels a long way away while we're in this kind of holding pattern of waiting for somebody at the top of that football club to come out and be scrutinised and accept it's nowhere near good enough and that errors have been made, and that they're going to put it right. And we're sounding like a broken record on here, but I don't see how anything moves forward if you don't get that. If you don't get that, then what you're left with a vortex again, and they'll shoot back about their communication channels. But that didn't go so well at the end of last season, did it? So if they want to go down that route again, then be prepared for the same sort of criticism. And then, of course, if it's follows by, to take your previous point, a patchy start again next season, then they'll come for the Webbers, they'll come for Wagner, they'll come for the players, they'll come for the owners. If it's still the same ownership mix, all of that is irrefutable. And if there's nothing to fall back on in terms of, but they did come out at the end of last season and said this was going to be different, that's going to be different, we're going to go in this direction, we're going to try and harness this, that. If there's nothing of that to stack up against it, then they're not really giving themselves much of an insurance policy there, are they? So, as I say, but on your direct point about the Webbers and the Wyn Joneses, Smiths, then if that's how some fans see it, then that's how some fans see it. But I can only repeat, that mix of individuals brought success previously. So, isn't that a counter to this idea that that's fundamentally where the issue lies? I think it's less the individuals, it's more what they have enacted that hasn't worked, and accepting that hasn't worked, and then vowing to put it right, rather than this, as I say, infernal purgatory that we're all going through at the minute.
I'm going to do something which is sort of preempting maybe a counterpoint that may come from people that listen or watch if they are on YouTube, or perhaps even people inside the club as well, given what we're speaking about. Maybe this idea that perhaps, or maybe the thing that people will level at us, and I know you've reiterated this already when you've kind of said it doesn't need to be through us, but I'm already preempting some people saying, "Oh well, you couldn't wait for this moment," or all of that stuff. I'm just getting ahead of that narrative. Well,
go back to last week's pod. After Middlesbrough, they've been whacked 5-1, and we got into a very big discussion about the future, because it looked and felt at that stage, and it's been reaffirmed today that it wasn't going to happen this season. So what next? And we categorically, it's there, it's on record. Go and listen to the audio, go and watch the video. Both said if Stuart Webber has still got the hunger, the drive and the energy, he's the right person to take this forward. So, that for me, at a stroke, should dismiss anybody who's saying that we have some sort of agenda and that we're out to get individuals or the football club. I mean, that's just borderline hysteria, really, isn't it?
Yeah, I don't think we've ever called for anyone to go, nor would we. It's not our job, really. It's just for us to argue about it.
I mean, all I will say, Connor, is that whether you choose to believe it or not, what we do for a living in terms of producing content, which we want people to consume it in as big a volume as possible, it's considerably easier challenge when things are going well, when that football club are winning games, when they are promoted. I'm loath to bring them into the mix at the minute, but just have a look over the border and see what's happening in Suffolk at the minute. That is a club that it feels like that they've really connected with a disaffected fan base after years and years of mediocrity, and the positive vibes around what they're trying to do. And Norwich have been there in recent times under the Webber regime, and for what we do, trust me, it's far better to be following a successful club and a club that's winning and a club that are striving to do things boldly and vibrantly and differently, as it is for fans. Fans don't want to go and have to sit through, a fourth consecutive Carrow Road game where they don't see their team win or score a goal, and we're the same. So, all I can say is, purely from a commercial, pragmatic point of view in terms of what we do for a living, it is far better for Norwich to be winning games than, unfortunately, what we have to sift through at the minute, which is a season which is careered off the rails, basically. So both on a commercial, professional point of view, as well as a personal point of view, there's absolutely categorically no agenda on our part, or certainly taking any satisfaction from the current state of affairs. Far from it. I mean, the opposite couldn't be further from the truth, to be fair.
Yep, I'm just getting ahead of a narrative that may well arise from people that watch this, or from elsewhere, as we've said. Sam, I wish we could have dedicated more time to this, really, but because they deserve more time than they're going to get, and we've got various plans and stuff for next season. But Norwich City women played at Carrow Road for the first time last Sunday in front of 7,500 people. Complete contrast, actually, with the type of atmosphere that we've just walked out of Carrow Road with today. But actually, what I was going to say is, for all of the criticism at the moment that the club has get and are getting, and probably justly are getting, this is something that they did get right in terms of marketing and in terms of the game itself, the occasion. It was really good to be a part of. It was a wonderful. I mean, you spoke to some of the girls, and obviously Sean Howells after the game as well. It's been an occasion that they've been waiting for. A bit of positivity was nice as well. So, I mean, let's just talk about that a little bit, because there is, I guess, positives from this football club at the moment, even when perhaps to many people it doesn't feel like it.
Yeah, I don't think they could have done much more to get it to where it was. It feels like they were in a position where it might not be so much in their hands to get people interested. I think that probably happens on the pitch and also in wider society and in the wider footballing community as to the growth of the women's game. Yes, they can play their part, but my point is they allowed as many people as could possibly be interested to be there if they wanted, if you know what I mean. Like when they're at the Nest, if 3,000 people want to go and watch, they just can't really. And I felt they facilitated a scenario that made it as attractive as possible and really created a stage that probably the women's team needed, because throughout my time as a Norwich City fan and now covering the club, until this season, it hadn't really ever been a consideration, where at clubs like maybe Arsenal, for example, there was always, as much as it maybe wasn't as well documented as the men's team, there was always a consideration of the women's team, and I knew that was a club that had historically done well and was talked about. And at Norwich, that wasn't really true until this season, and as the women's game grows, it's not currently as probably significant and well known and well supported as the men's team, but for me it now feels like a real part of the club rather than just something that's sort of semi-attached to Norwich City. And I know part of that is it officially coming under the banner of it being a team within the club, but I also think that's just with how it's been treated. And to be fair, I think the Norwich fans have shown that if you give them the opportunity to support women and to support the women's game, they will. And to see 7,600 people there was really, really encouraging. And as you said, it was a sort of atmosphere that, in contrast to the men's game, made you want to go again. And I actually was there quite looking forward to the next time when it happens, which I believe is quite soon, in a cup final. So I'd absolutely encourage as many people as they can to get down to that game. And it feels like they have shown that they deserve another date at Carrow Road after as much time as they had working towards that. Now having had one, having had it go so well, it definitely feels plausible, not even just from a let's grow the women's game point of view. If you've got 7,600 people going to the stadium, commercially that's a money spinner really, and it can only add to the club's growth and financial prosperity and the size of the club if they can add that to what they do on a regular basis. So I think probably people need to apply as much pressure as they can to make this happen on a more regular basis, because it was, as I said, an excellent afternoon. It was really vibrant and a really vibrant atmosphere, and the game of football that was put on was very entertaining as well. So not really an aspect that went wrong for me there. It probably went as well as they possibly could have hoped, and for me, I really, really enjoyed being there, probably more than I've enjoyed being at most men's games this season. And I'd suggest long may it continue, and hopefully we're there more often and it gets to the point where that's sort of part of our coverage, being at Carrow Road, watching them and reporting on them on a regular basis, because I think they've shown now that the market's there, and that's in the 4th division, by the way. With a little bit of investment or maybe more staff, they could skyrocket up the leagues, and if they can attract 7,600 people to a 4th division match, what could they do in the the Championship or even to dream the Women's Super League? Because it feels like at a time when the game is growing to this extent, there's the potential there. So yeah, overall really, really pleasing, really enjoyed it, and I think for the future of that side of the club definitely bodes well.
Yeah, my favourite moment of the day actually was the amount of young girls at the end who were looking in awe at the Norwich City players, and I think some of them couldn't believe that. It wasn't long ago they were playing their games at Plantation Park and having to pay for their own travel and their own kit, and the fact they've got to a stage where they've kind of had Carrow Road really and had the full treatment that the men's team get is wonderful, and I think they're back in action there next month in the County Cup final. If you missed out this time, then you can go and watch them there, and obviously hopefully they succeed there. Pad, I'm gonna let you decide. We can either talk about Hernandez's new contract, or I can tell you a story about a pigeon. So it's up to you.
Well, I know what I'd like to say, but in the interest of good man that he is, Onel, let's hear the Onel on Hernandez contract news. Why don't you just go with the pick? Let's have both, Connor. Let's go wild. Let's have both. Let's overrun.
Okay. Okay. I was planning.
It better be good now because you talked.
It's probably not, to be fair. But anyway, I went to pick up my lad a few days ago, and his mum owns 2 cats, and one of the cats had bought this massive pigeon, and it's the biggest pigeon I've ever seen, and they managed to drag it through, like one of those small square windows, like you get in a bathroom, through there, and it was sat in the cupboard, and because I'm an expert with animals, I said, oh, it's all right, I'll deal with it. So I've gone in, because when a bird get a pigeon, it wasn't dead, by the way, but it was in a pretty bad way. It had a wing hanging off, horrible to see, really. It's anyone who owns cats, it's not nice to see. But anyway, so the technique I thought I'd go with, I got a plastic bag over both hands, and I was going to Johnny Howson-esque pick it up and kind of take it outside. But as I went to pick it up, and usually I own cats that when they bring a bird in, they're usually stunned and they don't move. So it's usually quite easy to scoop them up. Pretty horrible, mind, but usually pretty easy. But this one sprinted across the hallway. So in the end, I've had to get a box and almost like trap it with a box, almost like you do with a spider, and remove it that way. Maybe it wasn't humorous for the bird, but it was a humorous experience.
So is the bird no more?
I don't know. I did kind of contact bird people, so hopefully I haven't had an update on said bird, but hopefully it's all right. I don't know if it's a metaphor for anyone.
Is the only available Norwich City link in this story?
Well, can
I have that choice back?
Anyway, on El Hernandez's contract, it's good news, isn't it?
Good news for Argos, yeah. No, and good news for Norwich, of course, as well. Yeah, no. I mean, despite what we've had to sift through earlier today and in the last hour of this really uplifting podcast, it's he is somebody who gets Norwich, and he said that in his club interview with Darren Eadie after they'd pushed out the contract announcement on Friday, that he feels it, he lives it. I mean, there was on his own recently launched YouTube channel after the Middlesbrough game where he did a bit of a monologue to camera, and you could tell when he's talking about how almost embarrassed he was to be part of what unfolded on Teesside that he gets it, and if you're a fan at the moment and you feel that you're disconnected from the football club, there's a visible symbol of somebody who you can identify with and you can feel is hurting as much as your fans are, basically. It's not enough, clearly it's not enough, but it's something to cling on to. And obviously the practical elements of, giving him a 2-year deal at his age, just turned 30, hasn't he, or he is 30, option of a third. I mean, you can debate that, but I don't think, particularly with the financial situation maybe going into this summer, you would be, if you let him go, and I think in all probability Rashica goes as well, and you're looking at it from a point of view of the squad and equipping the squad with those wide options to have a good go in the Championship. I think he can certainly, if you go back to that sample when Wagner was really extracting some assists and some goal threat from him over a consistent basis, probably for the first time in his entire Norwich career, that's got to give you a lot of hope that if he can really work with Onel now through a pre-season and into the next season, and he stays clear of injury, that you can extract that sample over a much longer period. And if you were to do that, why wouldn't you want that Onel Hernandez version in your Norwich team and going into the next Championship season? So, on both on a personal level and the connection with the fan base, great. But I still think there's a footballer there who, as David said on Friday to us down at Colney, that can get better, still can get better, still can learn new things, still can improve and add things to his game. And if that is the case, then for me that could be a good bit of business. Yeah, too right.
Boys, thank you very much. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. Of course, you can get in touch with us. We want to hear your views as well. We don't just want to be a podcast that is speaking at you. We'd like your involvement, so you can get in touch with us across the social media channels, email as well. You can find all the relevant links online. PinkUn.com, of course, the place for all of the analysis and reaction. I think we've hopefully said all there is to say on that, but we'll be at West Brom next week. Brilliant. And then obviously we have the Blackpool game, the Temu Pukki send-off, as it will be now, on the final day of the campaign. Enjoy the rest of your week. I don't blame you for trying to forget about football for a little while, and we'll see you very, very soon.